Get started.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I want to first and foremost thank everybody for hopping on the webinar today. I'm super excited to be with you to roll out the first installment of what I'm calling the 27T Impact Series. And so excited to have Michele join me here today to talk about the engagement equation and the 5 actionable ways to unlock employee engagement. Michele Haugh is the co-founder of Early HR and Early Engage. And to me, one of the brightest minds in employee engagement, human resources, all thing people management. And I'm so excited and so grateful that she's joining us here today to go over a topic that I think is so important and something that so many business leaders are considering and talking about today.
Awesome.
Yeah. And what we'll do is looking at the next slide, I want to make sure that everybody knows what this series is meant to do. So the impact series is really meant for business leaders that are making impacts on their organizations and want to take the expertise of people like Michele and bring them back with actionable steps to improve their overall businesses and their success. And so I want to start with why employee engagement matters. This is a topic that has been just growing in terms of consideration at the top of every business's thoughts and minds. And, really, I think this Gallup study here recently shows, why do you want to think about employee engagement? Why is this important to your business? Well, companies that have high engagement actually report a significantly higher profitability level, 23% higher. And when you partner in with the strategic benefits, with leadership, recognition, all of that not only creates better outcomes for employees, more engaged workforce, but it improves business results as well. And so I think marrying those two components really will be helpful for all of the business owners here and business professionals here joining us today. And so really what I want to do now is turn it over to our expert, turn it over to Michele, and dive into what steps you can take and what is driving this, and give you that opportunity to learn from one of the brightest minds here in the DFW area.
Well, gosh, what a nice introduction, Will. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a delight to be here. And it's a small group, so I'm excited just to have this be as interactive as possible. We'd love for you to make sure you're using the chat if there's things that you want to ask or something that piques your, some questions in your head, just feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And, would just love to hear from you along the way, any thoughts that you have around some of this information. Um, Will is such a great partner of ours. We do HR consulting, but we also provide employee engagement solutions to companies, not just here in the DFW area, but around the country. But Will has really just been a wonderful partner of ours and helping serve our clients really well. So thank you, Will, for inviting me to be here. I really, really greatly appreciate that. So we're going to start off by just talking a little bit about kind of dispelling some popular beliefs and something that I actually used to think when I was an HR practitioner. So I started my career many, many years ago, but the first, I would say, 10 years of my career, I worked for really big companies. And those big companies had big budgets. We had big teams of people. And so I mistakenly thought for a long time that you really had to have a big budget and a big team to be really good at employee engagement. And while it's certainly nice to have those things, um, I'm here to kind of dispel that thought and hopefully empower you, whether you're an HR leader in a small organization or you're a business leader. I want to share the good news with you that um, you don't have to have a big budget, you don't have to have a big team, but what you do need to have is intentionality and you've got to be consistent and action oriented when it comes to employee engagement because it really does not happen by accident. I actually did a post yesterday on LinkedIn and said, having good benefits, being nice people, that's all great, but it's not enough. And so we're here today to talk to you about 5 actionable ways that you can become a more intentional organization. And these things are not rocket science, and they're not things that are going to cost a fortune to implement. And some of them are pretty low lift. So again, we're going to talk about how employers of all sizes can move the needle on employee engagement, which, as Will said at the beginning, is really critical to success of businesses. It's important for attracting great talent, engaging great talent, getting as much productivity and outcomes, and then retaining that top talent as well. So here's a little bit about me. Will gave you a little bit of information, but I've been in HR really my entire career. I studied business in college and did a concentration in HR and started, as I mentioned, initially with some bigger companies where I was one of many HR professionals. And then as I was growing my career, I realized I need to actually go work for some small companies because I need to wear all the hats if I want to continue to grow my HR career. So that's what I did. I started working in smaller organizations and grew my HR career that way. About 10 years ago, I moved to Dallas. And I wasn't necessarily intending to leave my corporate HR leader hat behind, but I ended up taking an opportunity as an HR consultant and started working with startup organizations. And that was a really fascinating time of my career because I was working for a company that was doing HR outsourcing. And I got the benefit of working for or working to support over 150 fast growing companies. So the lens that I bring today is not only from a corporate HR perspective, but also having worked with a lot of very fast growing smaller organizations. And so a lot of my information that I bring to you today is from the vantage point of those smaller organizations that maybe didn't have the biggest budgets or the biggest teams, but are still making inroads to employee engagement. So, as Will said, why does this matter? So, as Will mentioned, that Gallup's most recent global research found that only 21% of employees worldwide are engaged at work. And so, what does that mean? It means that there's a whole lot of people that are not putting forth the amount of discretionary effort that it takes for companies to be really successful. And we do a lot of employee engagement surveys. And this is actually kind of, I think, a very sad statistic that most companies in the United States average 30% engagement rate. And if you're a company that gets a 70% rate or higher, you're actually considered to be a top tier company from an engagement level, just because the numbers are really that low. So, what does that tell me? There's an enormous opportunity here to do better, to be better, and to move the needle to improve the outcomes because there is that direct tie to organizational success. This is actually, I took a screenshot literally right before I pulled up this presentation because this is hot off the news. This actually came across my feed early this morning when I was looking at my emails early this morning at like 7:30. This was what came up on the news. So Gallup came out with this State of the Global Workplace report, and it said that employee engagement has receded. It fell last year, and it cost the world economy an estimated $438 billion, which is really scary. And they are citing the reason for this predominantly is at that manager level. Manager are caught between the expectations of executives, um, a lot of needs from their employees, whether it's from burnout or stress, or maybe they're feeling overworked because there's been lots of layoffs. Um, all kinds of things are going on, and the managers are kind of caught in the middle. So I'm actually glad, I'm not glad to see that, but I'm glad to know that was already going to be something we're going to be talking about in this presentation. So this is something that unfortunately is not getting better as a society, and it's just something that I think there's so much opportunity. So today we're going to talk about 5 things that I think are really, really critical to driving employee engagement. The first one we're going to talk about is, what does success look like, and how do you get really, really clear about that? The second one is, how do we build better leaders? The third one is, the little things are actually really big things. We're going to also talk about setting team members up for success and for future growth. And then we're also going to talk about measurements. How do we bring data into the equation to help us make better decisions, better choices, and to lead better? So those are the 5 areas that we're going to talk about today. So the first one I mentioned is being really, really clear about what success looks like. And I put in here, this is a little bit older. It's from January of 2024. But this was another headline that came out a little over a year ago that said, in the new workplace, US employee engagement stagnates. And there was a study in 2023 that says employees in the US continue to feel more detached from their employers. They have less clear expectations, they have lower levels of satisfaction, and less connection. And they don't feel connected to the purpose of the organization as much as they had prior to the pandemic. Um, and they feel less likely to feel like somebody cares about them at work and cares about them as a person. So I thought that's a really interesting study. So contrary to some people's belief is, people really want accountability and they really want feedback. And in order for people to be fully engaged at work, they really need to understand the organizational priorities. They need to understand how their performance is measured and how they contribute to the big picture. Um, and it's also really important to focus on outcomes versus just tasks. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Um, how are outcomes measured? And I put in here objectives and key results, which is just one way of measuring outcomes. And we'll chat about that a little bit later too. Providing cleared feedback through one-on-ones, and using storytelling so that people understand the why behind what they're doing. And I put a little blurb up here. I'm sure many of you have heard this famous story about JFK, who visited NASA back in the 60s. And he approached somebody who was uh, like a janitorial staff member and said, "Hey, I'm Jack Kennedy. What is it you're doing here? What do you do here at NASA?" And they said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And so that person understood the assignment. They knew that even though maybe they were not sitting at the control panels or they were not an astronaut, their contribution still mattered and were very, very important to the overall mission. And that's really sort of what you want people to understand, is what is the company trying to do, or the organization, and how do they play a part, a really important part to the overall scheme, and how the cause and effect of what they're doing impacts everybody else. That, using that storytelling in whether it's through job postings or onboarding, or even just, when you're trying to lift up your team and demonstrate how important they are to the overall mission of the organization is really, really so critical when you want to engage individuals. I talked about accountability before, and this is just another statistic that I think is really powerful, is that 7 out of 10 employees are not actively engaged when managers do not hold them accountable for performance. And, so sometimes we hear, oh, people maybe don't care about their jobs the way they used to. It's actually statistically not so. People do care, but they want to know, again, how do they fit? Are they doing a good job? Um, are they, meeting expectations, or what do they need to do to improve? People really, really care about those things, but they need to hear those words of affirmation, and they need to hear feedback on a regular basis. So if you look to the right, the other stat here that's really powerful is when managers regularly meet with employees about performance, employee engagement triples. So this is really meant for organizations that maybe just do annual performance reviews. Maybe they're very performative. They're not very engaging. They're one-sided, where a manager just sits down once a year and says, here's your rating, here's a couple goals, and then that's it. If that's sort of the mode of operation in your organization, it may be time to switch it up and to think, how can we drive more, regular one-on-ones? How can we leverage maybe quarterly feedback sessions, even if it's just a few questions, and make it a more participatory process where individuals can do maybe a self-reflection, or they can provide some upward feedback. Having more conversations versus, just a very directive review is a really powerful way to drive engagement. Leaders can also do so much in just providing a really clear idea on what success looks like. So often we work with companies that provide us with job descriptions. And when we look at those job descriptions, what we see is a whole bunch of tasks and responsibilities. But very rarely do we see what outcomes are necessary for success. And when we hear managers say, so and so just isn't working out. And when we ask the questions, why are they not working out? We find sometimes the managers that we're working with have a really hard time articulating what it is that this person is doing or not doing that is preventing them from succeeding. So I really implore all leaders to say, think about each role in your organization. What does not good look like? What does good look like? And what does great look like? And when you do that exercise, you can actually see how that can transform how you recruit individuals, how you onboard them, how you provide them with ongoing feedback, how you know, devise your performance reviews. It really has impact on the entire life cycle. And so I put up here just an example to try to drive this home. So here is a finance manager. And when we see, what is good versus great, you'll see they're kind of different. So good is often what we see on the job description, right? It lists, you need to close the books on time, you need to track budgets, you need to track variances, manage project deadlines, manage the accounting team, ensure compliance. So this is kind of your standard issue job description language. And what I call this is actually, when you're looking at having an organization that's performance driven, I call good table stakes. Okay. So this is like what is expected, but it's not necessarily moving the needle or really performing at a high level. But unless you actually tell somebody this, that, hey, this is table stakes, this is what we're really looking for you to do, is in the great category. We want you to use data to build strategies and insights. We really want you to find creative solutions to improve our margins, but do so without compromising quality. We really want you to develop your team. We want them to have improved financial acumen. We want them to be our future leaders. So we want you to model leadership behaviors. And you know what? It's important for you to build trust throughout the organization. We don't want you to be viewed as just the bean counter or some of the other weird stereotypes that are out there that the finance department has. We want you to be viewed as a strategic business partner. So guess what? That means you're going to need to build relationships across the organization. And you need to get out of silos and have everyone on your team build those relationships. But we find so often these conversations here on the right, they don't happen. They're not in job descriptions, they're not in job postings, they're not part of the interview process, they're not part of onboarding, and they're not part of feedback mechanisms. So when you take the time to really define what it means to be great, you start moving the needle towards having a much clearer expectations, more engaged team members, and a much more successful organization. So here's just one other example of this. So again, a traditional task in a job description might say, prepares monthly sales reports. If you have an outcomes-oriented job description, you might amp it up by saying, provide actionable insights and data analysis through the preparation of monthly sales reports, enabling the sales team to identify trends, refine strategies, and achieve quarterly revenue targets. So this also is not just giving outcomes, but it's also giving the why. It does a little more storytelling around we need to achieve quarterly revenue targets. So this is not just about preparing a report. You are making an impact on us being able to meet our quarterly revenue targets. And guess why that's important? It's important for us to keep, growing, keep the lights on, keep providing great benefits to our employees, all of those things. So that storytelling, that's how that can be woven in as well. And then also it's important to state, how are we going to measure this? Because that is really important for folks to understand, how is this measured? How do I know if I'm being successful? So again, just an example of a measurement is, tracking improvements in quarterly revenue, tracking, sales conversion rates, client retention, gathering feedback from the sales team. So again, it just gives people a clear idea of, they don't just need to get the reports out. Again, doing that is table stakes. That's up here. This is where people are going to start really driving value, and you're being much clearer in your expectations. So again, I already mentioned this, but setting clear expectations, it's not just a one-time thing. It's not like, oh, you're hired, here's our expectations, and it goes away. I have seen many organizations, they don't reiterate those expectations. And sometimes some of their more senior team members can fall into some ruts and into some really bad habits. And sometimes they're like, that's just Joe. Joe just sort of does that. Well, guess what? Maybe Joe needs to hear and have those expectations reiterated, because if they are doing having behaviors that are negatively impacting other team members or in the other departments, those expectations need to be reiterated. And so it's really at all aspects of the life cycle of an employee. It's not just at the time of hire, it's really throughout the entire relationship. And so I'd love to hear from you, and maybe you can pop some stuff in the chat, but how do you think, just curious if any of this resonated, but how do you think you could maybe help set clear expectations at different points in the employee life cycle? such as, again, during recruitment, onboarding, performance reviews, career development, or in leadership communication. Anybody have anything they want to share?
Michael, I see you raising your hand. If you can add a question to the chat, that would be great.
Well, while he's doing that, Will, I'm sure I saw you shaking your head a few times. Just, from someone from the outside, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, you've been in different corporate settings. How does this sort of resonate with some of your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think having that clear expectation makes everything run smoother, where there's not the interpretation being left to the employee. And that way, when it's done effectively, right, you've got everybody pushing in the same direction versus, getting 60% from one person and 40% from another and 50 from somebody else, because everyone has a slightly different interpretation of what their job and responsibility is. So I think it's really helpful that that component as a leader within an organization is really that foundational piece of creating that engagement is the clear expectations component. And
Yeah.
then Michael had said, when hired and during quarterly conversations or weekly one-on-ones, that's where a lot of that expectation setting is taking place. And, I think that's something we've uh, talked about I know I've got Lawrence on the line here as well through Vistage, is the importance of one-on-one meetings and how that's such a good
Absolutely.
opportunity to communicate freely and make sure that you realign the communication component with expectations.
Yeah, 100%. So we're going to move on to the number two and talk about the manager, right? And this is such an important statistic. And so if you are a leader yourself or you work with leaders, please remember this statistic that 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. Frontline managers, in particular, are the most crucial lever when it comes to engaging an organization's employees. And I find that exciting in one way and hugely frightening in the other, because we know companies are really good about promoting good individual contributors and giving them opportunities. But we also know it's usually a sink or swim kind of an opportunity, and folks are not given the development opportunities to help them grow. And I know I was my very first job as a leader was funny. I was in college. I was a lifeguard, and because I was, I guess, responsible, they made me the pool manager. I didn't know what I was doing. Um, but I will tell you from that moment on, I have been developing as a leader ever since. You never ever get there. It's not like you get to the top of the mountain and you ring the bell. Like, I'm here, I'm a fully developed leader. Um, from when I was, like I said, probably I was 20 years old and I was, scheduling people, lifeguards, and, doing cleaning bathrooms and doing other stuff. That was the beginning of my leadership journey, and it has not ended. So it's so important as you look at folks that are in leadership roles that they need that constant evolution. They need that training. They need to understand how to be a good leader. And as you saw at the beginning, the engagement levels are sinking across the world. And it's because that manager level is under so much stress and have so many things that are on their plate. So HR can have the greatest initiatives in the world, but if they don't have leaders who can lead well, those efforts, unfortunately, are going to fall flat. Um, I always say that leaders, they're not born, they're developed. Um, and with managers being primarily responsible for an employee's engagement level, um, they really, really need the support of the organization. And it's not a one-time thing. It's not like, well, they took that class in 2023 on how to be a good manager. Check the box. They should know this. No, that's not how it is. It's a continual evolution and it's a continual development of skills. And it is something that happens over time. So they really need to know how to model positive behaviors, how to provide meaningful feedback, how to create a sense of belonging, and how to align their team members. And really, effective leadership is so crucial to employee engagement. And here's another interesting stat is around consistency. Consistency is so important regarding employee engagement. If you have organizations, there was a study by Society for Human Resource Management that found that companies with consistent, systematic approach to employee engagement are 2.5 times more likely to outperform their competitors in financial performance. In contrast, organizations that rely on sporadic or ad hoc engagement initiatives often struggle to see sustained improvements in morale, productivity, and overall success. So, the next thing we're really going to talk about is what I mentioned before. It's the little things are really the big things. And this is again going back to where I mentioned that engagement doesn't need a huge budget. You don't have to do, crazy big parties or bring in a band or performers or, anything, crazy to really demonstrate that you care about your team members and you are committed to their growth and their well-being and that you're really excited that they're on your team. So it's important for you to create those opportunities to demonstrate appreciation for your team members. Um, and if you can make it personalized, that's even better. I once worked with an organization and we were talking about engagement. And they said, we're like a family here. We're a family. Everybody cares about everybody. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. I started asking questions. Well, tell me about some of your rhythms. How do you celebrate each other? Well, we don't really do a lot of celebrations. I'm like, okay, well, what about birthdays? Everybody usually, well, no, we don't do birthdays. We decided that we don't want to forget someone's birthday, that if we forget it, then that's going to be worse than remembering it. And I was like, yeah, really? Or is that kind of a cop out? We all have software um, that, I know we work with Rippling, as our HR provider. We're only a company of three, but I get messages reminding me of anniversaries, birthdays, all sorts of things. I put it in my Outlook calendar. If I don't think we would tell a client that we can't remember a certain date, right? So it's just sometimes those little things. I'm not saying you've got to remember birthdays and, every single holiday under the sun, but when you make those little efforts, and even if it's just, hey, once a month, we're going to celebrate anyone in the month of April, and give them a shout out. It doesn't have to be a big blown out affair, but simply giving somebody a personalized message or telling them why you appreciate them or maybe they love Snickers bars and you buy them a Snicker bar. All of those things can make a difference, believe it or not. So if you start weaving employee engagement opportunities into your daily interactions and your company rhythms, you're going to start seeing more consistency and you're going to drive a more positive culture and create when you create opportunities for people to come together and build relationships, that can also be really positive. I know one of our organizations that we support, we do monthly like activities. We help them to facilitate. We did one, actually, Samantha on our team organized a contest for them to guess, whose baby picture, was on the slide, or we've done trivia for them, or two truths and a lie. They're a fully remote company. And so finding those opportunities to bring people together can really make a difference because it just helps for people to get to know one another and just to engage in maybe a little bit different way and to bring some fun into the workplace. So if you can find ways to celebrate, have some recognition, build relationships, and have some fun, that's going to make a huge difference. So these are three terms. They're not from Gallup. They're actually from Michele Haugh. So me, I made up these terms, but these are the three things that I see quite often in organization. Um, there's the spaghetti at the wall approach to employee engagement, the party and Yeti cup approach, and the hope and a prayer approach. And you can just kind of imagine what those are. The spaghetti at the wall approach is like, well, let's try this. And we kind of throw it at the wall and say, does this stick? And we just sort of randomly do things. How many people have ever seen that in an organization? If you want to use the emojis, you could at the bottom or put something in the chat.
Yeah, for some reason we're having some trouble with the webinar chat, but you can enter it in the Q&A portion.
Oh,
We get
okay.
all the feedback from the Q&A. And I know, from my perspective, the spaghetti at the wall, it's like what I've seen is, there's good intentions, but
Good intention.
there's no follow through, right? It's like, oh,
Yes.
we're going to try this for 2 months. And then it's like the first
It's
one was good, the second one wasn't as good, and then we stop. And so
and
it just,
it just fizzles, right? But
yeah,
nobody ever talks about it ever again. That's the thing too, is not like transparency, like, hey, we tried this, we got this much the next time it didn't resonate. Do we continue doing it or do we iterate? Maybe it was good, but it needs some iteration. So, if you do have the spaghetti at the wall approach, I'm not saying don't try things, but don't just pretend they didn't happen. Don't let them fizzle and then you just never revisit it. It's important to have those conversations so folks can say, I really like that, but I just don't have enough time to do the monthly book club. But maybe if we did a book thing twice a year or something like that. But don't just let stuff fizzle. Then there's the party and Yeti cup approach. That's like the once a year, we're going to give everybody a party. We're going to give them, a Yeti cup. And we have really good intentions and we say thank you, but that's kind of the only time we do anything is once a year. And actually, we did an engagement survey last year for a company that every year they told their employees in October what the holiday party was. I did the engagement survey in November and I did some focus groups. You would not believe the amount of people that were worked up because as of November, they didn't know if they were having a holiday party because no one had announced everything. And they counted on those rhythms. And so, even though they weren't really doing a lot of consistent celebrations, that was one that they actually really counted on. So, um, anybody have experienced that? I know I have, where, you don't really get a whole lot of fun activities or celebrations, but all of a sudden at the end of the year, it's like, woo. Anybody see those at all?
the Christmas party, that's a pizza lunch, and yeah, the quick giveaway.
Yes. Lawrence,
But
we're going to talk about how to employee engagement. It what it means in sort of the scientific, I guess, statistical sense is um, how people are showing up at work. Are they putting forth their, everybody has effort. Are they working at table stakes or are they really putting forth their discretionary effort. They're making a choice to show up and really care about what they're doing, care about the results of the organization, really working up to their potential. That's really what that means. If you just show up and you're doing that table stakes level, chances are you're probably not super engaged. You're kind of punching the clock, you're doing what's expected, but no more. So the more you exercise discretionary effort, the more you care, that means you have a higher engagement level. And that's when companies, you can't grow a company if people are at that table stakes level. You just can't. You're just going to be maintaining and sustaining. You're not going to be growing. And then lastly is the hope and a prayer approach. It's pretty common. That's what I think of as an organization that they have good intentions. They're very nice. They try hard, but they're not consistent and stuff. It's all over the board. There's no clear strategy. And ultimately, they're just sort of trying. They're not being very, very strategic. And so ultimately, they're not super successful. So, what does inconsistent look like? Here's some specific examples, and you might recognize organizations that you've been a part of as I read through this list. So, it looks like sporadic celebrations that are kind of random, occasional all hands meeting, so a lack of commitment to transparency on a regular basis. Um, where a company is from outcomes is sometimes very vague. I know there's a lot of private companies that don't want to share their financials. That's okay, but it's still important to say, "Hey, we're steady. We're holding steady from last year," or you know what, we've grown 10%, and we're so grateful for everybody's effort. Giving people some idea of where the organization stands is really, really important to get their buy-in. Intermittent employee surveys. We see this with organizations that put a random Google Doc together and do a random survey. They get the results, they don't share them, they don't do anything with them. Those are going to be really ineffective. Occasional training sessions or maybe an occasional community event versus something that's more consistent, like, hey, every November we do an employee giving initiative, and that's something that is part of our values. That's part of our culture. That's something that is important to us as an organization, and we're going to start planning and talking about it 3 months ahead of time. So there's a difference between like, oh, maybe this year we'll do a toy drive at the holidays, but it's never, there's no consistency around it. One-way feedback that comes once a year, or not at all. Those are organizations that don't prioritize feedback. They don't have quarterly conversations. They don't have weekly or biweekly one-on-ones. And their performance reviews, if they're done, are very one-sided, where a manager just spews, feedback. They don't really ask for anything. It's not a two-way conversation. And the other last one is holiday/cultural celebrations are only tied to the holiday season versus recognizing that our teams probably have different backgrounds and everybody may not celebrate Christmas. They may celebrate Ramadan, may be their most important holiday. Yom Kippur, which is in September or October timeframe, is maybe their most important holiday of the year. And so having some cultural awareness and making sure that you understand those important holidays so that people can take time off, you can be respectful of maybe times that they're fasting or just being culturally aware is so important. So while well-intentioned efforts may offer glimpses of engagement, they often fall short of fostering the consistent, sustainable employee involvement vital for attraction and retention.
Michelle, Lawrence had a follow-up question, and I was going to take a shot at it and then let you add on. He was saying, in regards to table stakes, is that 50% buy-in? Is that 0% buy-in? And when it comes to the employee engagement conversation, the way that I picture our conversations, and maybe you can add or subtract what I'm saying, but it's going from, hey, I'm an employee that shows up, I check the box, I'm there on time, or 15 minutes late, or what have you, barely getting by. And how do you move the company forward to get that emotional buy-in to the company, right? As founders, as business owners, as leaders in an organization, you're building your emotion around the business into what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And as a leader trying to drive that employee engagement, it's creating these opportunities and this consistent communication to provide similar uh, emotional buy-in to the end goal of the organization. Is that fair?
Yeah, and just reflecting back to the fact that the past 10 years I've been working with startups. Startups have, if they are not growing, they're fizzling out. And they have to grow at a really high rate. So if you are in a company that wants to grow, you have to exercise, you have to be able to find ways to get people to use their discretionary effort. And there are some companies that may just want to stay steady and people are just doing what's expected, bare minimum. And if that's your organization, that's okay. But if you are somebody who's tasked to grow a company or grow really any kind of organization, you've got to step it up to get folks to, as Will said, just start showing up differently and using some of that discretionary effort to really get the buy-in and because we all have it within us, right? We can do the bare minimum or we can really show up and do our best work or put our best attitude forward or whatever. It's all a choice. And so how do we get folks to choose to do better, to be more invested, to be positive, all of those things? And it really is all tied into how the company is setting the expectation and delivering on their end of the bargain as well. So we talked about inconsistency. This is what consistency looks like: meaningful planned celebrations, professional development, personal development, diversity and cultural awareness, caring about where people come from, do they have any special needs from a scheduling perspective or dietary needs or things like that. When you're having a company celebration, maybe not everybody eats meat as a part of their religion. And so just a simple act of saying, is anyone here a vegetarian? That can be such a powerful message that you care. Giving and volunteerism, is that part of your culture? Do you do something like that? Consistency that can really speak so positively to to your team members. Milestones, recognitions, and rewards, is that part of your company rhythms? Do you have all company meetings? Do you have transparency around company success and conversely, company challenges? Making people aware, like, hey guys, this is where we're at, and this is why we're making these decisions because we've had a drop in revenue, and here's why. Maybe it's because of the cost of materials. Maybe it's, things that are beyond your control. Having those conversations is really important. Doing community building and team bonding, again, those feedback rhythms. And, this is what Will spends his time on is employee benefits and wellness, caring about people's wellness beyond their day to day. Do they have financial wellness? Do they understand, things like 401k investments and things like that? Also, I found when I started getting really serious about employee engagement, I found that when I went month to month, I was always too late and I was always scrambling to pull something together at the last minute. When I started planning 12 months at a time and putting a calendar together on all of those rhythms, I found I started getting really consistent and I was much more successful. But I always had to have at least a 3-month window. So you might laugh at this, but if you look at my calendar, the first week of July, you know what's on my calendar every single year is to start thinking about the holiday party. And that's just because I've been in HR for so long. I know when July comes, it's not October or November when a lot of people are like, oh, shoot, what is it we're doing for the holidays? Just think of it as a business, like a project you're working on. Give yourself ample time, put it in your calendar, make it a business process, and you're going to be much more successful because of it. Um, Setting team members up for success and future growth. I work with so many companies that are really good about developing professionals. In fact, I literally jumped off of one call and jumped on this call, and we were actually doing a training session for one of our clients. They had 70 people on the call, all learning about a topic together. But when we see organizations that say we're just too busy to do a webinar or to do professional development or to let people take an hour to learn about something different, that is a problem. And it should signify that something has got to give. Because prioritizing employee development is not a nice to have. It's truly an imperative. And when managers view training as a disruption to their productivity, it's very short term thinking. And if you really want to say that you care and you're vested in your teams, you're going to care about their development. Because if you are not doing those things, you're going to risk burnout, disengagement, and ultimately turnover. So, a lack of a commitment to employee growth sends a very, very clear message that you as an organization value output more than you do people, and it's not a good message to send. So, caring about training and development is super, super important. This just shares some information about some stats around Gallup says, reports an 11% greater profitability, twice as likely to retain employees if organizations make strategic investments in employee development. Nearly 9 and 10 millennials say that career development is very important, and Gen Z is, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear this, they think the very same, if not more. And we know that our demographics in the workplace are changing, and this is an important thing to understand is the expectations of the people that are in the workforce today and are going to be continuing to grow the workforce. Career growth opportunities is the number one reason people change jobs across generations. So it's not just a trend, it's a fundamental employee expectation. And if somebody doesn't see a future with you, they're going to find future elsewhere. So this is just another, talking about how you can help shape cultures using learning as a way to fuel engagement. It's really, really powerful. The last one, I know we're running short on time, so I just want to talk lastly about measuring engagement through engagement surveys. Regularly measuring engagement through diverse methods is crucial for understanding employee sentiments, adapting to evolving needs, and fostering a responsive organization and culture. But I always say, please, if you're not willing to be transparent with the results, please don't do a survey. And we've had to tell companies this before where they're like, well, we just want to know how bad it really is or whatever. It's like, unless you're willing to share the results, don't do it because people are going to be upset. They're going to feel like, you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes. And even if there's a low rating, you've got to be transparent and you've got to say, here's what we're going to do to move this forward. It's so, so important. There's lots of other ways that you can actually get feedback. It doesn't have to be through an employee engagement survey, but we find if you do them consistently, It's really amazing what you can find out, and it gives you very actionable data to move the needle forward. There's also pulse surveys that are more frequent and short. Some people do stay interviews, or they call them or they do like up level interviews where people skip a level and they might talk to their manager's manager once in a while just to kind of see how things are going. And then focus groups. We typically do focus groups after an employee engagement survey just to get more data. And they're really, really powerful in finding out information. And usually it's just a cross section of the team members. So, in closing, there's really 5 things to remember. Number one, be really clear about what success looks like. What is good and what is great? Um, Build better leaders, invest in folks that are leading your teams because remember, 70% of their engagement is directly tied to their relationship with their manager. And so you could have a great company, but if you have a poor leader, you're going to have issues with the team that reports to them. Remember, the little things are really big things. If somebody loves, gummy bears, and you drop a thing of gummy bears on their desk, it's sometimes the littlest things that can make a really big difference. Or just remembering that, you know, they've got an important date coming up, someone's graduating, put that on your calendar so you can say, hey, have a great weekend. I know so and so is graduating, or, just little things like that make a huge difference. Set your team members up for success and future growth, offer opportunities for professional development, and then ask for feedback regularly, whether it's through pulse surveys, engagement surveys, or maybe just those skip level interviews. Whatever you do, if you do it consistently, it sends a clear message to your team members that you really care and you care about getting it right. And you're okay with feedback that maybe isn't positive because guess what? That's the biggest gift that they can give you because you then know and you can make changes to move the needle. If you don't have feedback, you just continue doing the same things over and over unknowingly. So again, driving employee engagement doesn't happen by accident. And it's so important for attracting, engaging, and retaining top talent. But it's got to be consistent. Remember the spaghetti at the wall, the hodgepodge kind of actions. They show good intention, but they're not going to really drive any meaningful change. I'd love to take some questions, but while we do that, if you would be so kind as to give some feedback so that Will and I know, how we did today. All you need to do is scan the QR code, and in thanks for doing that, for providing feedback, I have a downloaded or a guide that you can download, and it's called the 10 Steps to Drive a More Connected and Committed Workplace. And the first page just has really easy things you can do that are not a huge lift. And then on the second page, if you want to dig a little deeper, it actually will give you a little bit more kind of deeper initiatives that demonstrate a stronger commitment towards employee engagement. So, anybody have any questions that you'd like to out to the group or to me or Will? We'd love to hear them. And I know our time is up. I apologize. I get so excited about this, but I can hang on a few minutes if you do have questions. But if you need to jump off, we certainly understand.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate you joining us here today and all the feedback and perspective that you gave in regards to employee engagement and how it can help organizations drive better outcomes. And at the end of the day, I think that's what everybody's looking to do here. And so it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. And given that we're kind of here up at time, I want to make sure that we stick to our schedule here. So thanks everybody for joining the call. Really appreciate Michele joining us and providing her expertise. If there's anything you have question-wise that pops up as you're falling asleep tonight or throughout the week, please feel free to reach out to Michele or myself, and we'd love to just continue the conversation in any way that would be helpful to everybody here today. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Will. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye. You want to stop recording, Will?
Yeah, I think I need to take back the being the host. And there we go.